Okay, hello everybody. My name's John Galt from the Community Learning Development team within Education Scotland, and I'm just introducing the session today, which is looking at a bit of research that is still ongoing but coming to an end, looking at the Community Learning Development Workforce in Scotland. I got told when we introduced this last time that I spoke too long, so I'm not going to say a great deal. But this is a joint piece of work that's been done with the Standards Council and with ourselves. The research report has not been finalised and published yet, so what you're getting this afternoon is a sneak preview of some of the themes that are coming out of that. And I think some of the themes, as we'll find out in a minute, really interesting, and some of them a bit uncomfortable in terms of what it tells us about our sector. Somebody reminded us in the first session as well that maybe it would be useful if people didn't tweet some of the kind of messages here that we're giving you, because it's unpublished as yet. So please listen to what we're saying, but wait for maybe the final report, which will be out in the next month or so. We're going to hear from Claire Hammond from Rocket Science in a minute. Rocket Science are the research company that have undertaken the research. So she'll take us through some of the kind of key findings. There'll then be an opportunity to discuss that. So Colin Ross from the Standards Council will take us through a kind of discussion session, and you'll see the group before you last time was very productive and put some of their thoughts up on paper, and we'll be asking you to do the same thing, because I think for us it's really useful to get your feedback on your kind of first reactions of what you're going to hear. But I think that's probably all I'm going to say. And yes, nodding over here. I'm going to pass over to Claire Hammond from Rocket Science to take you through the research.
I was going to say I haven't done anything yet. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a bit of a, as John said, sneak preview of the findings. So they are very early findings, they are very high level, and I've picked out some of the more interesting ones rather than giving you a complete exhaustive list, or we'll be here until next month. So then what we're going to do is just check whether anybody has any kind of clarification questions, and then we're going to move into a small group discussion where you can start to say, well, what do these mean for me? A little bit of context to what it was we did. So we had over 1,200 individuals participate in this research over the last year. They answered a survey, and then of that we interviewed 47 of those who had responded to the survey. Unlike prior years' surveys, what we did was have 4 different categories. So we asked practitioners their views, we asked employers for some information on their workforce, we talked to volunteers about what it was that they were doing, and then we had a stakeholders one as well. If you didn't quite fit the other 3 categories, then we got your views through that stakeholder one. The most robust findings coming out of that were around practitioners and employers. Volunteers, while we got quite a few volunteers, they weren't quite geographically as represented as we would need them to draw some really solid conclusions. So big shout out to Aberdeenshire, who were very, very present in the surveys, which is fantastic. So what that means is that what we've done is focus on, here are the practitioner and employers in numbers, and the volunteers and stakeholders in themes and conversations and things like that, so that everybody's voice is heard. So this was the spread for the survey, so a relatively good spread around practitioners and employers geographically, so we were quite happy with that. We also asked about whether they were by sector, so public sector or third sector. So you can see under employers it was about 50-50. And practitioners, there were quite a few more from the public sector than the third sector. However, I will note that the numbers that we got for the third sector were a big enough number that we were able to make some pretty meaningful conclusions from it, so that's great. We also asked about whether they were community development and or community capacity building, adult learning or youth work, and quite a few answered that they had a focus on more than one of these things, but we also, as you can see, got a good spread across that, so we were relatively confident that, look, we can make some pretty good conclusions here. So what I'm going to do is just run you through kind of 6 of the very key messages, and then we'll get into talking about them. So the first one is the CLD workforce is likely to experience a skills gap in upcoming years. About 25% of the current workforce are either retiring or leaving the CLD sector in the next 2 to 5 years, with more than 10% of those leaving the sector due to retire. And that's going to leave quite a considerable skill gap because those that are set to retire have been in the workforce, the CLD sector, for a very long time. So if we have a quick look at how these age bands break down, the ageing workforce is a bigger issue for the public sector than it is for the third sector. Generally, through the interviews that we did, the nuance coming around that was actually in quite a lot of local authority areas there were hiring freezes, or there weren't new opportunities coming up because of lack of budget, or some local authorities had policies to recruit internally before they went out externally, which means that they've had a relatively static workforce in terms of who's there, and then as that goes on, that workforce is getting older. We also looked at whether there was a trend between youth work, adult learning, community and development, and broadly you can see that the youth work population is slightly younger in terms of the workforce. So this is the figures around what practitioners said when we asked them, where are you in the next 5 years, the classic interview question that you always get and always hate getting when you're going for a job. So 75% said, yep, going to still be here in 2 to 5 years' time. About 12% were saying, no, I think I'm going to move on from CLD. And then the rest were saying, actually, I think it's time to retire. So a greater proportion of the third sector workforce were intending to stay, but not a huge difference between the two. The next finding is that the CLD sector is not very ethnically diverse, with over 97% of the CLD workforce in Scotland being white. We tried to have a look to see, well, does this vary based on different local authority areas that might have a higher BME population and they therefore might have a slightly more diverse, and so we looked at Glasgow and a couple of others as examples, and generally, no, not a huge amount. The next finding is there is a gender pay gap, with men tending to take higher banded roles, but male workers are underrepresented across CLD more generally, with the vast majority being female. And this is the gender pay gap. So what this is the proportion of that workforce that sit in each of the bands. And as you can see, when it starts to get above 35,000, women are much more underrepresented in that, despite making up the vast majority of that workforce. The next one is CLD qualifications are generally not required in the third sector, but required in the public sector, and practitioners have a wide variety of training beyond that CLD practitioner. So as you can see from this pie graph, half of them have CLD qualification and another qualification, and through the interviews it became quite clear that often that CLD qualification was a returning learner or somebody who was going back post-experience to gain some form of qualification, with about 30% having a CLD only and about 15% having another qualification. The most common other qualifications were in social sciences or teaching and education, as well as business, accounting, IT, admin, all of the support functions. We asked employers, do you generally require specific community and learning qualifications for your paid staff? And as you can see in the public sector, there was quite a large that said, yep, 70% they have to have, 70% of employers are saying, yep, we have to have CLD qualifications. It's more split in the third sector. The next one got a laugh from the last group, no pressure guys, just saying. The CLD workforce is highly committed but stressed. So what we found was a high level of commitment. People have been working in this industry for a very long time. I think my favourite quote is, if you cut me open, you would see CLD running through my veins. So there's a high degree of commitment. Yep, I'm in this for the long haul, I'm in this for the right reasons. But quite a few, and I'll move on to the next one, is saying, are stress levels reasonable? And as you can see, there's a large kind of purple group that say somewhat, and then you've got roughly about half of people saying, no, they're not a reasonable level of stress to deal with. When we were talking to people through the interviews, it was very clear that often it was related to volatility of staff, so short-term contracts in the third sector, for example, or limited resources, understaffing, that kind of stuff. So all of the story that we're used to. The next one is there are staff development needs that employers and practitioners may struggle to meet. There was a concern that training available is lagging behind emerging skill needs, and that resource restrictions are limiting people's ability to take time out and to fund training and development. So what we did is we asked, what are your key areas for practitioners? What areas do you feel you need development support in? And the top ones there are leadership and management and digital skills. We also asked practitioners what training had you received over the last 12 months, and the results are inverse. So that says a couple of things. Either there's training that's not available for the high need things, or you can also say, well, when they do receive training, it's very highly effective because they're saying they don't have those skill gaps anymore. We asked employers, okay, you've got skill gaps, but which of those are you not confident that you could meet for a variety of reasons? 35% said nothing. I'm quite happy I can meet the skill needs. I've got this under control, guys. And 65% said, actually, no, there are some skill gaps that we are going to struggle to meet. And as you can see, digital skills and leadership management, organisation and managing resources, which is kind of linked into that leadership and management, they're all high up in that. We looked at whether there were differences between the third sector and the public sector and through the different types of focuses of work. Third sector employers were more than twice as likely as public sector employers to feel like they could address the training needs. Youth work practice training appeared to be more of a gap for the third sector than public sector, and this was reversed in adult learning and education practice, where the third sector were expressing fewer concerns about meeting development needs in that one. Public sector employers were quite 3 times more likely to feel unconfident that they could support in facilitating and promoting community empowerment than third sector employers. Digital skills were a higher concern for public sector employers, and adult learning employers were slightly more likely to feel like they could address than those in community development or youth work. So we said, okay, what are the drivers of these concerns around skill shortages? And as you can see, those top 3 reasons: lack of resource and funding, lack of staff time to take them away from frontline to do this, and a lack of available resources. So then we said, okay, well, if you start looking at recruiting, how confident are you that you can recruit paid staff with the appropriate qualifications and the appropriate skills and competencies? And we deliberately separated those 2 out. And as you can see, most are saying somewhat agree. And so we explored that in the interviews. Is it that some people are feeling like they can't find anybody that's even close to being suitable, or are we saying that there are particular skill sets that are missing in there? So somebody might have 8 out of the 10 things you're looking for, and what are those 2 things that they're not finding? And surprise, surprise, leadership and management and digital skills come back up again here. So I've given you a really quick whistle-stop tour behind the scenes of our analysis, but the key messages here that we wanted to say today were likely to experience skill gaps in the future due to this ageing and retiring workforce. The CLD sector is not ethnically diverse. There still exists a gender pay gap and an underrepresentation of men across the CLD areas. CLD qualifications are generally not required for third sector, but generally more for the public sector, and there's quite a wide variety of talent and training out there. The CLD workforce is highly committed but stressed, and there are skill gaps, particularly around leadership and digital. Now, I do want to just caveat at this point in saying I've pulled out, as the pessimistic economist that I am, all of the things that I think are going to be useful for you guys to be able to fight your corner. But what I haven't drawn out in today's was the amount of dedication and amazing work that we became aware of through this. And so the report teases out a lot more of those positive messages around how great some of the stuff is that's happening around there. So I don't want it to seem so doom and gloom, but what we were really wanting was, what can we give you through this research that helps you articulate what you need from other people?
Thank you. That's something we didn't get in the first session. Thank you, Claire. So you're definitely the good group. Yeah, in a minute we're going to move on to some discussion in the group.